Imagine you are Commander Tairo Aoyagi, a seasoned air officer, standing on the flight deck of the flagship Akagi at 10:20 in the morning on June 4, 1942. For 6 months, your fleet has been invincible. You were at Pearl Harbor. You swept through the Indian Ocean. Every enemy you encountered was brushed aside. Below decks, aircraft are being armed for what you believe will be the final, decisive blow against the American fleet. You have weathered their pathetic, piecemeal counterattacks this morning. You believe the worst is over. You are about to be fatally wrong. This is the moment of ultimate triumph. And within the next 5 minutes, you will be engulfed in a storm of fire and steel from which there is no escape. You will watch the most powerful naval air force on the planet collapse before your eyes. How did it come to this? How did it all go so wrong? To understand the sheer shock of Midway from a Japanese perspective, one must first understand the mountain of confidence upon which they stood. After the stunning success at Pearl Harbor, the Kido Butai, the first air fleet under Vice Admiral Nagumo, entered a 6-month period of uninterrupted victory. They were the tip of the spear, the apex predator of the seas. The force was built around 6 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku. These were not merely ships. They were floating airfields, crewed by the most experienced naval aviators in the world. Many were veterans of the long war in China, hardened by years of continuous combat. Their skill was extraordinary. They could launch over 100 aircraft in less than 10 minutes, an efficiency the Americans were still struggling to achieve. After Pearl Harbor, their advance was relentless. They supported invasions across the Pacific. They shattered Allied naval power at the Battle of the Java Sea. In April 1942, Nagumo led a 5-carrier force into the Indian Ocean, sinking the British carrier HMS Hermes and 2 heavy cruisers with almost casual ease. No corner of Japan's expanding empire appeared beyond their reach. This unbroken chain of victories bred a dangerous condition Japanese officers would later call victory disease. A deep, corrosive overconfidence began to infect the high command. They believed their pilots were naturally superior, their fighting spirit unbeatable, their plans flawless. American morale, they assumed, must already be broken. This arrogance did not remain an attitude. It seeped into strategy. Warnings were dismissed. Risks were waved aside. The men of the Kido Butai had never lost, and could not imagine that they ever would. That supreme confidence followed them across the Pacific toward a tiny atoll named Midway. The architect of the operation was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet, brilliant, calculating, and often reckless. Despite Japan's victories, Yamamoto was uneasy. He had lived in the United States. He understood American industrial power in a way many of his peers did not. He knew Japan had only a narrow window to win the war before America's factories overwhelmed them with ships and planes. Pearl Harbor had not been decisive. The American aircraft carriers had escaped. As long as they remained at large, the U.S. Navy was a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan's empire. The Doolittle raid in April 1942, when American bombers struck Tokyo itself, was a profound humiliation and proof that Yamamoto's fears were justified. The carriers had to be destroyed. Operation MI was born. In Yamamoto's mind, this would be the decisive battle of the war. The plan was extraordinarily complex, a vast, multi-layered trap designed to annihilate what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Midway would be the bait. Yamamoto was certain the Americans would sail from Pearl Harbor to defend the island. When they did, the full might of the combined fleet would destroy them. A diversionary force would strike the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, drawing attention north. An invasion force would seize Midway itself. Vice Admiral Nagumo's Kido Butai, 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, would neutralize Midway's air defenses, then annihilate the American fleet. Hundreds of miles behind them sailed Yamamoto aboard the super battleship Yamato, ready to deliver the final blow. But the plan rested on dangerous assumptions and pure arrogance. First, it depended entirely on surprise. Japanese leaders believed their naval codes were secure. They were catastrophically wrong. American codebreakers in Hawaii had largely cracked the main Japanese naval code, JN-25. They knew the target was Midway, a fact cleverly confirmed when the base transmitted a fake message about a water shortage, which Japanese intelligence promptly intercepted. The Americans knew when the attack was coming. They knew who was coming. As the Japanese fleet advanced in radio silence, Believing themselves unseen, Admiral Chester Nimitz was already positioning his carriers to spring a countertrap. Second, the plan was too complex. Multiple fleets were spread across hundreds of miles, operating without communication. They could not support one another. Nagumo's carriers, the most critical element of the operation, were effectively alone. Third, Japanese intelligence failed completely. A planned reconnaissance flight over Pearl Harbor was cancelled. Submarines meant to detect American carriers leaving port were deployed too late. The U.S. carriers had already slipped past. The Japanese sailed toward Midway convinced the American fleet was still in harbor. They also underestimated American repair capabilities. They believed USS Yorktown, damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea, would be out of action for months. Instead, an extraordinary effort at Pearl Harbor returned her to service in just days. The Americans would bring 3 carriers to Midway, not 2. Perhaps the most revealing moment came during pre-battle war games aboard Yamato. In one simulation, an officer playing the American side launched a surprise attack that destroyed 2 of Nagumo's carriers. Rear Admiral Ugaki Matome, the chief umpire, overruled the result. The carriers were restored. Such an outcome, he declared, was unrealistic. The flaws were visible even then. They were ignored. At 4:30 a.m. on June 4, 1942, the decks of the Kido Butai roared to life. In a breathtaking display of efficiency, 108 aircraft were launched in just 7 minutes to strike Midway Island. Their mission was to neutralize the island's air power and clear the way for invasion. Nagumo held half his aircraft in reserve, armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, ready for the real target, the American fleet. Midway-based American aircraft soon launched desperate counterattacks. They were brave. They were ineffective. Japanese Zero fighters tore them apart. Anti-aircraft fire finished the rest. Not a single bomb struck Nagumo's ships. From the bridge of Akagi, it appeared to be another effortless victory. At 7 a.m., everything began to unravel. A message arrived from the Midway strike leader, Lieutenant Tomonaga. There is a need for a second attack. The island was not neutralized. Nagumo faced a terrible dilemma. Yamamoto's orders were explicit. The reserve aircraft were to remain armed for enemy ships. But there was no sign of an American fleet. Scout planes reported only empty ocean. To Nagumo, a cautious commander, the logical choice was to eliminate the known threat, Midway, before worrying about a hypothetical one. At 7:15 a.m., he gave the fateful order: rearm the reserve aircraft for a second strike on the island. Across all 4 carriers, the hangar decks descended into controlled chaos. Torpedoes were removed. Armor-piercing bombs were wheeled away. High-explosive bombs were brought forward. Fuel lines crisscrossed crowded decks. It was a slow, dangerous process. Then, at 7:28 a.m., a delayed scout plane from the cruiser Tone sent a chilling report. 10 enemy ships sighted. Moments later, a second transmission arrived. The enemy force included an aircraft carrier. The hunters had become the hunted. Nagumo reversed his order: prepare to attack enemy fleet units. The confusion below decks only intensified. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi aboard Hiryu urged an immediate strike. Send whatever aircraft were ready. Hit the Americans first. Nagumo hesitated. Doctrine demanded a fully coordinated strike with proper fighter escort. His first wave was returning from Midway, low on fuel and needing to land. His carriers could not launch and recover aircraft simultaneously. He chose to wait. It was doctrinally sound. It was fatal. As the Japanese carriers turned into the wind to recover aircraft, American torpedo squadrons arrived. Flying low and slow in obsolete TBD Devastators, they were slaughtered. Of 41 planes, only a handful returned. They scored no hits, but they dragged the Japanese fighter patrol down to sea level, leaving the skies above the carriers unguarded. By 10:20 a.m., the torpedo attacks had ended. On the bridges of the carriers, there was relief. They had survived. Now it was their turn. On the flight decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, pilots sat in cockpits as engines came alive. The ships turned into the wind. They were at their most vulnerable moment, and they had no idea. At 10:24 a.m., a launch signal was raised. Then a scream tore through the air. Dive bombers. Out of the sun, from nearly 20,000 feet, American SBD Dauntless bombers appeared without warning. They were from Enterprise and Yorktown. The attack was devastating. Kaga was hit repeatedly. One bomb destroyed the bridge. Another detonated among fueled aircraft in the hangar. Soryu was struck by 3 bombs, igniting her interior. Within minutes, both ships were doomed. Akagi was hit once. It was enough. The bomb exploded among armed torpedo planes, turning the hangar into an inferno. Nagumo stood frozen as his fleet burned. His staff dragged him from the bridge. In 5 minutes, the heart of the Kido Butai was destroyed. Only Hiryu remained. Yamaguchi struck back, crippling USS Yorktown. But American dive bombers found Hiryu later that afternoon. 4 bombs sealed her fate. By the next morning, she was gone. The losses were catastrophic. 4 fleet carriers. Over 3,000 men. Among them, Japan's most experienced naval aviators, irreplaceable. The defeat was concealed. The public was told Midway was a victory. Survivors were silenced. Lost ships remained on official rosters. The truth was buried. But Midway changed everything. Japan would never regain the initiative. The war of attrition that followed would be unwinnable. Midway stands as a timeless lesson. A warning about arrogance, about flawed assumptions, about hesitation at the worst possible moment. In 5 minutes, an empire's ambitions were shattered. Thank you for watching. To uncover more hidden stories from the war, please subscribe to The Hidden Past.